the online launch of this year's edition of Early Childhood Matters, the journal by the Bernard Van Leer Foundation that has been showcasing the latest research on early childhood for over 20 years. And in this year's edition, we examine how behavioral science can touch the daily lives of parents and other caregivers, creating opportunities to provide better and more nurturing care to babies and toddlers. We have a large variety of contributors and writers from around the world in this year's edition. You'll hear from some of them today. Others are here. I'm seeing them, but won't be presenting. But we'll maybe hear some of their thoughts in the chat. I'm Irene Caselli, and I'll be your host today. I've been a journalist for 2 decades. First, I was a foreign correspondent in Latin America, and 5 years ago, I started focusing on early childhood development for my own newsletter, The First 1,000 Days. I was also the guest editor of this year's Early Childhood Matters, and I'm connecting from outside of Athens in Greece. So maybe we'll start with the first poll. Yes, there you go. It'd be great if you could pick here your answer, because it will help us see which sector you work in. And as I said, please feel free to tell us where you're from in the chat. We have a very international representation, and I'm seeing there is still a lot of people answering. So I'll come back to the poll in a second. In the meantime, I'll go back to housekeeping. You may have heard me say this before, but you can listen in Spanish or Portuguese, just picking the interpretation channel at the bottom of the screen. Again, remember to keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. And we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to write them in the chat. I'll try to monitor them, and I'll prompt you again a little bit later. So just looking at the poll right now, we're seeing that we have some 30%, over 30% from NGOs, loads of people working in philanthropy, but also private sector, government, and academia and international organizations, but so far mostly from NGOs. One more question for you, one more poll. We'd like to know whether you are aware of behavioral science. When I myself was asked to edit this year's edition of the journal, I knew very, very little about behavioral science and how useful it could be as a mother and also as a journalist writing about early childhood. So I'm interested to see what you're answering here. And there are several behavioral scientists. We have maybe a 9% now, 8% of behavioral scientists. We have loads of people that apply behavioral insights in their work regularly, and some that have experimented a little, but there's a 14% there that are asking what behavioral science is, as I did when, at the beginning of this year, when this journey started. Well, thankfully, as part of the journal, we had a great advisory board of experts in behavioral science. And one of them is here to talk today, and she's Lisa Janetian Pritzker Professor of Early Learning Policy Studies at Duke University in the United States. And she's joining us from Durham in North Carolina. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to hand it over to you for some initial remarks.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. It's such a delight to be here today and see all these everyone from every sector around the world. I want to begin by being extremely grateful to the Bernard Van Leer Foundation for having the vision and energy to pull this volume together, and the entire team. There's too many of you for me to thank each of you personally, but I'm going to put gratitude out to the entire team for putting this volume together. It is a refreshing volume on this topic that sometimes, because it speaks to so many disciplines and so many sectors, it's very hard to find one go-to place. And I hope everyone on this call will agree with me when they take a look. It is a blend of scholarship and practice and creativity, and can really showcases the innovations of using behavioral science in this field of early childhood. I think this volume will also really set the stage for why and how this framework is just so promising and powerful in this field and in supporting children's development. So I'm a trained economist. I fell into behavioral science accidentally. I think that might be a theme for many of us, and maybe that's something we can talk about. And I fell into this field in part because I was really interested in how people make decisions, acknowledging that parenting is very hard, and that most parents, all caregivers, most of us, have very good intentions when it comes to wanting to support children. And behavioral sciences really offers a lens for understanding why those intentions might not always translate and how we can create environments to support those intentions. So you're going to hear lots of themes as we move over to the authors around decisions and decision-making that considers all actors and people that are involved in children's lives, that they are humans like everyone else, and that parenting and caregiving is something that happens in context. So I think that is my introduction to this fantastic volume, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I agree, there are so many people that were involved in making this year's Early Childhood Matters. It would be very hard to mention all of them. And we have loads of them here now in the chat. So I'm not going to name names because it wouldn't be fair. But we have many of the authors of this year's edition that will speak now. And I'll briefly introduce them. And then we'll start with their brief introductions, and then we'll go to questions. So again, if you'd like to leave a question, you can do so in the chat, or we'll go back to questions in about half an hour. But now let me introduce some of the speakers and contributors to the journal. So we have Ariel Kalil, Danielle Levin, professor at Harris School of Public Policy of the University of Chicago, where she joins us from. We have Joshua Zhang, research associate at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He's joining us from Boston. Dina Al-Zaoubi, advocacy and business development manager at Royal Health Awareness Society in Jordan, and she's joining us from Amman. And we have Ivan Budassi, the head of the Behavioral Science and Public Policy Unit of the government of Argentina. He's usually based in Buenos Aires, but today he's joining us from Rio in Brazil. So Ariel, let me come to you first. Applying behavioral science to early childhood development isn't a brand new idea. So why has it not been embedded into the field? And what's the exciting potential that you think it has? And what's holding behavioral scientists and early childhood professionals back, you think?
Okay, well, those are all big questions. Let me also just say many thanks for including me in this volume. It was a wonderful opportunity to work with you this summer and fall. I mean, this field is changing so rapidly with so much new evidence coming in so quickly that every time I get to write a kind of overview, high-level picture, I find myself writing something new, which is always interesting and inspiring. So to answer your very big picture question, I mean, certainly we see lots of fantastic intersections of behavioral insights in the early childhood development intervention space all over the world, as is being done by all the many people on this call. But when I started out asking this question, I found that there were a couple stumbling blocks to making this intersection. I'm speaking from my perspective of a trained developmental psychologist, but who has spent a lot of time collaborating with economists and, trying to understand perspectives from both fields. So my first observation a few years ago was that most developmental psychologists, pediatricians, early childhood development practitioners thought about child development as what children need instead of what do parents and caregivers do? And so right away, I think that makes it super hard to think about behavior change, because there's an endless list of things children need. And I think we can look around to a lot of interventions and see that many of these very ambitious ones pile a lot of stuff on that list, and the interventions keep getting bigger and bigger. And as I say, though, they take the perspective of, let's think of all the things that would help this child thrive, and let's put them into an intervention, and let's just see if that shifts the needle on child skill development. So I found the focus to be not super amenable to behavioral insights, which, as Lisa has said before, is fundamentally about decision making. Next, I found, even if we try to shift the focus onto parents or parenting, again, in my own field of developmental psychology, I found this, actually surprisingly, since I've been at this for 25 years, a kind of amorphous concept. Like, what actually do we mean by parenting? Well, it turns out we don't really have a super specific answer to that. We kind of say, there's one parenting style over here, and there's another parenting style over there. And each of these styles is comprised of multiple different kinds of behaviors and emotions and affect. And sometimes our goal in these parenting interventions seemed to be, let's try to make parents shift from one type of parent to another type of parent. And that really stumped me. I just don't know how you achieve change in behavior on all these dimensions simultaneously, and how would you measure whether you've succeeded in really changing the type of parent a parent is. So I think the framework for how, as I said, non-economists have typically thought about early childhood development and intervention in parenting has not made itself amenable to a behavioral insights approach. When I think of a behavioral insights approach to parenting, I want to ask myself, what is the setting in which a parent or a caregiver is making a decision this moment, this day, this week, this year, about something very specific. How much time do I have to invest today? How much money do I have to spend? Will I enroll my child in this program? Will I get my child to school? These are decisions that are shaped by a multiplicity of factors, the social context, family economic conditions, etc. But I felt, let's just take these decisions one by one and examine what the forces are that are driving parents to make the decision or not, or again, as Lisa alluded to, driving parents to not make a decision despite professing to want to make that decision. What is the intention-action gap in parent behavior? This is not at all new in behavioral economics. Any behavioral economist who has studied behavior change in the realm of health promoting behavior, savings for retirement, going to the gym, eating more nutritious foods, any behavior like that, this is standard operating procedure. And I think an important innovation is to try to apply that in the realm of parenting, and to ask yourself, is it possible to think of parenting not as a style, not as some agglomeration of qualities, but simply an accumulation of decisions? Now, again, that's a singular perspective. It leaves other things out, but you have to start somewhere. And I'll wrap up by saying that in my work that we do in Chicago, this approach has really opened up some interesting avenues for theory testing, for designing targeted interventions, and for understanding causal impacts of specific parent choices and behaviors on specific dimensions of kids' skill development. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Ariel. Ariel, and I must say that as a parent, just hearing you say, you know, how do we push parents to change behavior in so many fields? Just that idea that just takes a huge load off of my back, and that I think we don't think about that enough, even in daily life. So that's also why it's very interesting to be reflecting on the theory in that sense. So thank you very much for this. We have a link in the chat to Ariel's article, for the online version of Ariel's article. And now I want to go to Joshua Jong. Josh, traditionally behavioral science interventions or campaigns also have tended to target mothers as the primary caregiver. But you say, rightly so, that we should also focus on fathers. And in the journal, you share evidence from Uganda and Vietnam on how behavioral interventions can be adapted for male caregivers. Please tell us more.
Thank you, Renee, and thanks everyone for joining from all over the world. It's especially great to see a lot of people from the programming background and NGOs. I think a lot of the work that I've reviewed or that I'm presenting today comes from those innovations there. So would love to hear what else is going on in the chat that you may be involved in about fathers. So as Irene said, just a bit of background to my piece. I had conducted a systematic review this year with funding from the Bernard Van Leer Foundation around where are fathers in caregiving interventions. And so that is a context from which I had approached my article. And we know from developmental psychology, sociology, gender studies, et cetera, many different disciplines that fathers matter for child development in numerous different ways. So for example, studies from the US and even globally have shown that fathers' own parenting practices and specifically responsive interactions, play and communication with their babies is positively associated with child development outcomes. And this is even after we account for the influence of mothers. We also know that fathers are important because of many indirect ways, such as the ways that they support their partners through co-parenting, and more broadly, the investments and resources they provide for the family. Now, as Irene was saying, there is most of the parenting interventions focus on moms, and we have not really done justice or honestly considered how we can support fathers in parenting programs. And I think that's where behavioral insights, behavioral science, better understanding behavior change strategies can help take us to the next level, not only in implementing more programs for fathers, but determining how best to do that. And so I did this systematic review. This work is in press, but essentially me and my team at the Harvard School of Public Health reviewed 5 electronic databases, over 7,000 articles in the peer-reviewed literature, and ultimately identified 44 articles about program evaluations that had included fathers in behavioral programs, essentially caregiving programs, with respect to improving any type of early child outcome. And these were all focused in low and middle income countries, which is where most of the world's children live, which is where the evidence has not really been focused nearly enough. And so from this systematic review, I found a lot of learnings. And while that's not the focus of the piece of my article, from that review, I wanted to share 3 ways today that especially relate to thinking about behavior change, and to Irene's question, what types of adaptations using a behavioral science perspective do we need to consider in better engaging and supporting fathers? So I think the first thing that I learned from my review was how delivery models and the contexts to Lisa's point, the context in which we deliver interventions either can be a more enabling or may not be the most promising environment for then supporting and encouraging behavior change. So for example, in a lot of the interventions we reviewed, we found that programs were trying to engage fathers in the health system, mainly because that's where a lot of interventions for mothers have been tried. And some of the studies were showing that there's a lot of stigma around men attending waiting rooms or ANC visits. And so that asks the question, is that the most kind of effective approach for working with fathers? Perhaps it is in some contexts, but maybe it's not in others. So in addition to the delivery model, I also reviewed content. And so looking at across all these interventions, what kinds of messages are they targeting and delivering to fathers? And again, from a behavioral science perspective, I think a lot of what we were seeing is interventions using content curriculum that had been previously tried and tested with mothers and just delivering that same message with fathers. But is that really resonating with men? Was formative research conducted in these studies to know whether fathers identified with that message? Not really. And so I think that opens up another avenue. And the last piece that I'll say is around behavior change techniques and looking at what these interventions had, what strategies these interventions had used. And so this is a figure from the paper that's forthcoming about the 21 different behavior change strategies. So up top, you see two-way education, social interactions, whether the father-inclusive programs engaged their female partners, all the way down to other techniques like goal setting, fathers reflected in media, mass media, whether the programs are bringing fathers together with their children. And on the y-axis, or sorry, the x-axis, you see the percent of studies that had done that or had used that behavioral component. And basically, we're seeing a lot of gaps. Anything in gray means that these programs are not doing that. So I think this also shows the creativity, the insights, the technical components that we may need to integrate into father-inclusive interventions to have better recruitment, retention, but also impacts. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Irene. Looking forward to talking more about this.
Thank you, Josh. And now I want to go to Ivan, because one of the things that we also represented in the journal is that governments are starting to pay more attention to the opportunities of behavioral science. We have evidence, for example, from India and the UK in the journal. But I want to ask you, Ivan, what it was like to set up the first unit in the Argentinian government, and how did it help improve early childhood policies?
Irene, y quería hacer en tu persona un agradecimiento a la Fundación por la invitación y a Florencia López Bo, una conocida común que trabaja, argentina conocida común que trabaja en el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, que nos permitió estar en esta reunión y participar en el journal. Así que muchísimas gracias. Bueno, creo que uno de los obstáculos principales que tuvimos al momento de pensar en una unidad de ciencia del comportamiento se vincula a lo que Irene, con mucha candidez, con mucha sinceridad, reconoce ya en el primer artículo de nuestra revista, que dice que ella cayó un poco por casualidad en el ámbito de la ciencia del comportamiento y le costaba encontrar que estaba fuera de su radar, esa es la expresión que utiliza ella, y cómo vincular lo que ella trabajó y estudió tanto con esta ciencia del comportamiento. Bueno, y eso se puede hacer extensivo a todo el campo de las ciencias sociales, porque realmente, y en eso, y va un poco a adelantar nuestra conclusión, ¿qué pasa a los que hacemos ciencia del comportamiento? Que luego de 3 premios Nobel en los últimos 20 años en el campo de la economía, no hemos logrado trasladar este conocimiento al resto de las ciencias sociales. Bueno, y en eso, en Argentina al menos, parte de muchas cuestiones, pero charlemos de algunas. Primero, esta tradición de que las políticas públicas son algo importante, algo de grandes titulares. Entonces, hacer lo que hacemos nosotros cuando trabajamos con Behavioral Insight, que es diseccionar algunas partes de ese gran todo, como por ejemplo la crianza de chicos o los primeros años en la infancia, ver pequeñas porciones de ese gran todo es complejo para quien está acostumbrado a pensar en las grandes políticas. Y también quien ha invertido, para hablar en lenguaje de ciencia del comportamiento, es lo que llama la falacia del costo hundido, el sunk cost, el sesgo del sunk cost, que, bueno, toda esta gente que se dedica a hacer políticas públicas, a estudiar y a trabajar en niñez y en las otras áreas de las políticas públicas, ha trabajado toda su vida con, digamos, las 3 o 4 herramientas básicas, que son o el castigo, o el incentivo, o la información. Entonces, pensar, abrirse a que existen otras herramientas que no suplantan, que ese es un tema central que nos tenemos que convencer. La ciencia del comportamiento no curan el hambre en el mundo, ni el calentamiento global, ni son la panacea universal, sino que nos permite abrir una ventana a tener otras herramientas que el comportamiento racional de los padres, en nuestro caso, no pueden trasladar a los chicos. Entonces, nosotros seguimos, y veo que la mitad de los quienes están hoy tienen un acercamiento inicial, si se quiere, a la ciencia del comportamiento. Hay una Biblia en cuanto uno piensa en armar una unidad de ciencia del comportamiento, que es el libro de David Halpern, Inside the Nudge Unit, el creador del Behavioural Insights Team en el Reino Unido, allá por 2010, que fue la primera unidad comportamental que se fundó en un país. Y a pesar de ser un país del primer mundo, a nosotros también nos sirven sus consejos. Que primero es tener un champion, que puede ser el presidente o algo cercano en el presidente. Nosotros lo tuvimos en Argentina. Gustavo Vélez venía de organismos internacionales, tenía un gran conocimiento de ciencia del comportamiento y fue él quien convenció al presidente, quien nos dio su respaldo explícito y quien nos hizo también el honor de que estemos dentro de la Casa de Gobierno, lo cual simbólicamente tiene un poder muy importante y más en países presidencialistas como el nuestro. Luego, la tarea es convencer al resto de la administración pública, de la burocracia, pero también de la academia, que está acostumbrada a trabajar con estas herramientas mucho más tradicionales. Y nuevamente aquí la herramienta comportamental para tratar de vencer el sesgo del status quo, esa resistencia a cambio que todos naturalmente tenemos, incluso quienes hacemos ciencia del comportamiento. El hecho de conocer la existencia de sesgos no hace que nosotros estemos libres de ellos. Entonces, empezamos a trabajar, encontramos grandes aliados, por ejemplo, en el campo de la salud, en donde ellos están muy acostumbrados a trabajar en lo que en la jerga se llama experimentos aleatorios randomizados o RCTs. En cambio, en el resto de las ciencias sociales, pensar en esto, y sobre todo en torno a la niñez, les parece que nosotros queremos usar a los chicos como conejillos de India, como guinea pigs, digamos, para probar alternativas. Y lo que nuestro trabajo fue también convencerlos, es que nosotros no sabemos si la replicación de experimentos de otros países va a tener una aplicación igual en Argentina o en cualquier otro país o otro entorno cultural diferente. Entonces, que antes de lanzar una gran política pública, antes de desembarcar con todos los fondos que esto representa, con la infantería del gobierno desarrollando una política a lo largo y ancho de un país como la Argentina, 8º país en extensión del mundo, era conveniente probar. Y aquí hubo una gran resistencia, sobre todo en el ámbito educacional, por ejemplo, o quienes se dedican a tratar con chicos inicialmente. Ahora bien, hemos tenido también, gracias al apoyo de Florencia López Boy y al Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, la posibilidad de desarrollar algunas cuestiones, algunos trials, algunos experimentos en materia de primera infancia en nuestra área de incumbencia, como por ejemplo el tema del amamantamiento materno o humano, digamos, cómo lo estamos trabajando en un municipio, para darles algunos ejemplos para ver cómo funciona esto en la práctica. En un municipio cercano a la ciudad de Buenos Aires, de 900.000 habitantes, donde veíamos que en los diferentes centros de salud se recetaba leche de fórmula sin un patrón demasiado posible establecer. En algunos se recetaba mucho y en otros poco. Por ello es que, bueno, estamos viendo cómo se enhebra toda esa cadena de decisiones para que la madre finalmente no insista en la lactancia materna y no se lleve esa leche. También tenemos los temas de nutrición. Es muy poco el porcentaje de la población que no puede acceder al alimento, pero sí accede a alimentos de escaso valor nutricional. ¿Cómo cambiar eso? En nuestra pequeña intervención en guarderías de chicos hasta 3 años y colegios, en los comedores que tienen allí, ver cómo reaccionan ante la diferente presentación de del alimento y cómo toman más frutas, más alimentos frescos. Bueno, esa es un poco la grandeza y la miseria de nuestras intervenciones. No estamos cambiando el mundo, pero sí podemos hacer un experimento, ver si funciona y replicarlo a lo largo y a lo ancho del país. Para terminar, porque ya se me ha ido el tiempo, creo que el desafío que tenemos de llevar adelante, nosotros hemos sobrevivido a una primera crisis ministerial en la Argentina, pero tenemos un gran desafío en países de escasa calidad institucional como la Argentina, lograr que esta unidad se conserve en el próximo gobierno. Y aquí también un pensamiento para todos los organismos internacionales que veo que están aquí presentes. Bueno, nosotros los que hacemos ciencia del comportamiento no tenemos que quejarnos de que las personas no conocen la ciencia del comportamiento. Es nuestro trabajo, ya que conocemos los sesgos que impiden profundizar el conocimiento en ciencia del comportamiento, usar algunas técnicas para que ya a 20 años del primer premio Nobel de Kahneman y el póstumo de Tversky, nosotros logremos convencer a la academia, a las ciencias sociales en general, pero en particular a los gobiernos, de que la aplicación de esto en los diferentes campos de la política pública, en especial en la infancia, es provechoso y sobre todo es costo efectivo. Nuestras intervenciones son sobre todo pensar soluciones que son bastante sencillas de aplicar, solo que hay que probarlas, ver cómo funcionan en el campo y no simplemente copiar de lo que pasa en otros países del mundo. Muchísimas gracias, Irene.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Gracias. And now we're going to go to Dina, who, like me, is not a behavioral scientist. But Dina, you're still, anyways, busy running a behavioral pilot in Jordan that targets pediatricians and parents. So how did you find out about behavioral science, and what convinced you to start embedding behavioral insights into your work?
Thank you so much, Irene. And it gives me great pleasure to be here today and to speaking with y'all. And I just want to acknowledge my colleague from the programming team at RAS, Ariel, who co-authored this article with me as part of the great ECM publication. The matter of the fact is RAS, the Royal Health Awareness Society, has actually been employing behavioral science in our work regarding non-communicable diseases since 2005. But for some reason, the conversation around the overlap between, changing behaviors and the non-communicable disease risk factor was actually more mainstream than, thinking about employing these evidence-based techniques into early childhood development. So in 2018, and Elvira from the BVLF team and the BVLF colleagues, they conducted this training in Jordan, and it was focused on nudging with examples that relate to interventions around early childhood development, which was when we first found out about the use of these techniques and how they can be actually employed in the spectrum or the field of early childhood development. And we know that, from our work with parents and healthcare providers, that interventions that focus on them, they are actually effective in improving early childhood development outcomes. But we also know that the success of these interventions and this programming relies heavily on how much they're willing to engage with these programming and interventions. And and it's all about, as Ariel was just saying earlier, it's not about just having the information, it's about day-to-day decision making and all of the challenges and the barriers that you face just as part of being a parent. And when you layer that with the challenges of being part of or operating as a parent within a low middle income country setting, it kind of changes the equation, and it actually requires thought and requires intervention that is not only setting but also culture tailored, which is the beauty of applying behavioral sciences to ECD programming, is that it gives you actually that opportunity. And we also know from our work, because it's mainly focused on health, that the places where health services are being provided, health facilities and the health sector in general, is a great way to interact with parents, and it's a great place to implement interventions that are related to early childhood development because of two factors: the trust that the parent has in the health system and in healthcare providers, as well as the fact that it has a very large reach. And it allows us to reach more people than any other setting. So we've started this pilot in Jordan where we, employed some factors that we already knew were successful from also our NCD interventions and from the insight gatherings and the studies that were conducted prior to starting the pilot. So I don't want to say a lot about the pilot because I want you to go back and read actually the article, but it was a combination between prescriptions and stickers. And the overall aim of that intervention was for the children to take better care for the parents to take better care of their children. And we focused on two behaviors. One was related to eye contact and the other was related to screen time. And we found that parents actually found this intervention, they received it very well. And while we've heard before and during our interventions with pediatricians is that they didn't think that the parents would want to have such conversations in the healthcare facility setting because they thought they'd be more focused on the physical checkup side of things, reviewing the vaccination program and all of that. And it was great to see that parents actually wanted to start these conversations. And I think the potential for starting these conversations in health facilities between parents and pediatricians actually opens up, the prospect to so much more because of the close-knit fabric of the community here. Sometimes information is passed on that is not necessarily what is evidence-based, what is scientifically accurate, and what's in the best interest of the child. So it is great to have that trustworthy source of information speaking about not just the physical health side of things for the child, but also delving into topics that have to do with parenting. And who knows, maybe that could lead to improved early detection and many more, health prospect changing avenues for the child.
Thank you so much, Dina. And this is the time to ask questions. In case you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We have maybe 5-10 minutes for questions. But I'll make sure, yes, you can add any questions to the chat. I'm going to call on Tim Gill, who's an independent scholar, and he's one of the other contributors to Early Childhood Matters. And I will ask you, Tim, it's good to see you, about what we can learn from behavioral science when it comes to designing public spaces for children and caregivers. And yeah, tell us about your article also.
Sure. And first, thank you so much for giving me the chance to contribute, and it's great to be here. And I'm really pleased to see the children's spatial lives being a focus of the work of Bernard Van Leer Foundation and thinking around early childhood, because children are citizens and their lives and their experiences don't just happen in homes and institutions, they happen in neighborhoods and in public space. So I think I absolutely agree and have learned a lot about the importance of thinking about context and the kind of real world situation that caregivers find themselves in when they're making decisions and when they're going about their lives. And I think when it comes to weaving in play opportunities, outdoor play opportunities, proximity and convenience are really important. That creating places that match the patterns of travel and activity of parents and caregivers. So spaces that are next to childcare settings, that are on those nodes in neighborhoods where people are going past anyway, and then thinking about how the qualities of those sites or spaces can really encourage parents to linger, caregivers to stay, and children to play. But we get sucked into thinking about design and bits of equipment and forget about all of those earlier questions about, is this a place that parents and caregivers will actually walk by? And if they do walk by, will they want to stop, or is it just going to be something that they leave behind as part of the rest of their day? So those are the kind of lessons that I'm picked up from schemes I've worked on and from some of the research that I studied for the piece that I wrote.
Thank you so much, Tim. We have a question here from Bharat, which is about what your observation or perspective on fathers' role or behavior in a patriarchal society is. And I wonder whether Josh is happy to take this.
Sure, yeah, I mean, if I can think aloud, I mean, while I understand how behavioral science and believe that behavioral science as a discipline is at the core of how we want to impact outcomes, I also think it needs to be thought in tandem with things like gender and particularly using behavioral science to address social norms and gender norms, because behaviors at the individual level are contextualized, embedded within systems, culture, context, attitudes, norms. And when trying to get fathers to change their behaviors, so much of what underlies their behaviors, as the person in the chat commented, is just patriarchy, what they believe are acceptable and desirable or valued behaviors. And if those norms are not also addressed and the gender transformative components are not included, then I think we can only go so far to, for example, get fathers to play if they believe that they have no role and that's entirely their partner's responsibility. So the short answer to that question is just how I think we need to better understand the attitudes and norms and design programs to also target those. And I think that may require other strategies beyond what we're trying to do to change individual level behaviors.
Thank you, Josh, for that. And we have a question here from Maria Claudia Marina, and this is for Dina. She's saying it's important that pediatricians find ways to help parents, but how did you manage to train the pediatricians in this sense? Do you have a specialty that you have? Can you tell us a little bit more about the training for the pediatricians?
Okay, so we actually, for this pilot, a training took place for the pediatricians to ensure that they were able to understand, to begin with, the value of these small interventions, because as I mentioned, the intervention was primarily through a prescription and colorful stickers and conversation openers. So we needed them to trust in and understand the value of, integrating behavioral science within the intervention and what we were doing. But also we needed to do some, conversation openers between them and the parents, for them to really understand that this is a need and that there is demand on the parents' side to having these conversations. And we also, as part of the training, focused on the technical sort of aspect to it and the delivery of the messages, because we know that pediatricians are already knowledgeable, they're already well equipped, they have the information, but it was the way that these conversations would be opened up and how the key behaviors and the key messages would be tackled.
Thank you, Dina. We have a lot of comments coming in that are very interesting here. And there's also a wider question from Marcia Cristina, and I hope I'm understanding it right, which is really how much do we need to keep the theory and how much do we need to adapt to the context when it comes to behavioral science? I'm seeing Lisa actually nod. Lisa, would you be able to answer this about the importance of context? We also have a few articles actually in the journal about the importance of context, for example, in the Global South. But yes, it'd be great to hear from you.
Great, thank you. I wish I hadn't nodded. Now I have to speak. This is such a great conversation, and the chat is really lively. So I think this is a really interesting tension and really threads together Ariel's comments and Josh's comments and everyone else who's spoken. That the behavioral sciences offers this opportunity, right, to test theories in a very refined way, in the ways that the natural disciplines and the way they've sorted out have really fallen short, right? Going back to this theme that parenting is hard, complex, and every science has a very, I would argue, pretty narrow siloed approach to thinking about what it is to be a good caregiver or what children need. And so we should honor that this is an opportunity to kind of really push science forward. And that is certainly one approach to use the sciences or behavioral sciences through things like field experiments. But at the same time, one of the things that I very much appreciated working in this, even if I am in the business of pushing basic science forward, which we hope will generate new ideas for interventions, that our starting point with behavioral science is often being very humble, right? And coming at the context in which we're thinking about intervening, of people living in that space, of their histories, of their experiences, and really spending a lot of time speaking to people, understanding the systems in which they are situating themselves in. If that step is not done well, I fear, right, that we will not, this view of behavioral science will not actually make a lot of progress. We haven't talked a lot about in this chat about how we do this work. There's been some hints of that. You know, I think there's a temptation that this is easy. It's intuition. Social norms matter. Let's just change decisions. Let's adapt what happens well when we encourage people to go to the gym, to parents reading books to their child. But it is not that easy. I think to do it very well means spending a lot of time in the context, in the communities, with the parents, and understanding their current situations. So it's a little bit of both and.
Yes, Lisa, it's actually great. And we have another great question in this sense of how you do it. Here from the chat from Alex Baum, another one of other authors. And I'm going to ask Ivan to answer briefly. I know it's very hard, but Alex is asking, how do we help governments understand the value of investing in behavioral science?
Well, the first thing is that to change the initial attitude that this is a kind of academic play. What we should do is to say that these are useful tools, that they are cheap, to convince them about the cost benefit, that analysis that it implies. It is implied in every behavioral intervention, and at the same time, the difficult question that there's not a bullet, a silver bullet for all problems. And the other thing that Irene and Ariel were stressing, that we have to test. Not that we are having 3-year testing, because, you know, electoral terms are short, they need responses right for tomorrow, and there's a change of mind of making any of the other traditional tools public, that it seems that what we call the action bias, that they are doing something to try to calm them and to tell them that we have to at least do this little piecemeal work that Lisa was speaking about, that we have to see how decision is made and which kind of intervention that we have. But I think that to convince a very high official, president, is one of the best things that we can do, or an influential minister, to have their backing, and then to have some low-hanging fruits to detect them in order to have prompt results. Because, you know, politics everywhere and that's a reasonable thing, needs results. So let's pick some of the things that in the general context we know that is going to be useful and we can have better results, and then we can go forward with the more sophisticated matters. But one of the main things is to show results and to do this early testing.
Thank you for that, Ivan. We have loads of interesting comments and more questions in the chat about, implementations and what the next steps are. So, one of the great ways to go about this and to get some of the answers is to actually read the journal. And so our next question for you that is going to come as a poll is what you're most excited to read in the early childhood matters this year, what you'd like to learn about. So you have this poll now quickly, and I'd love to hear this. And if I can go back to all of our presenters and ask them to give me a super brief answer to this, since we have Ivan here, we'll start with Ivan. You probably have all read quite a few of the articles, but I'd love to hear, Ivan, what you'd be most interested to read about in the magazine or learn about?
Well, I think that what I was really engaged with the behavioral design article that teams wrote, because that's again the change of mindsetting. How we can do with very cheap and practical intervention change a lot in people's lives. It's not that you need a huge child center that costs millions of dollars, that if you design carefully how you help to make one of our mantra to make easy for people to interact with each other or to have good experiences in their childhood, that's great, that's cheap, and that's very useful. And the thing is to change the mindset. That's a great thing about the team's article. Nevertheless, all of the articles are very exciting, but I picked this because it was very interesting for me.
Thank you, Ivan. Ariel, let me come to you next. What would be your pick?
Well, I'm very interested in understanding how behavioral tools shift not only the quantity of specific parenting behaviors, but also the quality. More is not always better. There are diminishing returns to most things. And I think we're at the place in the research agenda where we have thought a lot about how to just motivate more, but not necessarily how to motivate more better.
Yeah, that's great. I'm seeing Dina nod. Dina, do you want to take it next?
Sure. Well, I'm actually interested in how we can integrate behavioral sciences into policy, right? Because it seems like the go-to approach in terms of scaling and in terms of sustainability and seeing long-term impact, with regards to how children are growing up. So we'd love to learn more about that.
That's great. Josh, next to you.
I'm seeing a lot of the use of technology and media to change behaviors, including fathers' behaviors. And so there's several papers that talk generally about the use of media. I think for the research, I'm curious how this may need to be tailored, adapted, either recreated and redesigned to further engage men and what that looks like and whether that's impactful in ultimately improving child development outcomes.
That's great. And Lisa, to you next.
I would like to encourage the Bernard Van Leer Foundation to make sure to produce volume 2 in like 2 years, so we can continue to engage as this community. And pointing back to what Ariel said, every day there's a new sort of nugget, a new lesson, a new insight, and this application of this science is so important to behavioral science. And so I'm looking forward to volume 2.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa. And there's been so many interesting answers. There's a lot of interest in all these topics, from what behaviors we should be encouraging for caregiving to how behavioral science can support parents, or how professionals can apply behavioral science in their work, etc., urban settings, policy. So we're coming to an end. This has been a very interesting launch, but also it's sparked a lot of interesting reactions, and the chat is very interesting, and it's trying to take my attention away from actually moderating this. But as Lisa was saying, hopefully this is just an initial step into a longer conversation that can be had. You have all the details to read the volume and to be in touch. And thank you again to everyone who's joined us today from all around the world, and to everyone who was involved in making this Early Childhood Matters possible this year. Thank you to all the authors that are here, that spoke, to everyone else who's listening. And thank you to everyone behind the scenes at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation and beyond for making this possible. So thank you again.